how do you call it, that frequent adage, right? Which says, know your audience and practice, practice, practice. So that's going to be something that we should keep in mind all the time. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide. Come on. Oh, here we go. So these are some of the key dates that I need you to keep in mind. I'm going to go through these by July 10th. We expect you to sign up for a couple sessions, one in the month of July and another one in the month of August. These sessions are going to be office hours with Sarah and myself. We will be sending you a link, and we would like you to sign up for those 2 sessions by July 10th. All right, so that Sarah and I can plan our calendars as well. On July 11th, we're going to have a lecture, which is going to be focused around building your pitch and making it more impactful, right? The first office hour session that Sarah and I are going to dedicate in July is going to be to go over your business plan and look for ways to polishing it. Okay. Then by July 31st, that will be the due date for you all to sign up for the summit event. The summit event is for you. It's a capstone for our program and should be a very interesting, dynamic session. During that event, you will have the opportunity to engage conversations with advisors, investors, discuss your project, receive feedback, and we want you to create some excitement about your technology and your science. By August, on the week of August 15th through 19th, we're going to hold the second office hour session to finalize your business plans. And by August 29th, expectation is that you all submit 3 documents: your target profile, your business plan, and your executive summary to ACT. This is in preparation to the summit, which will take place on September 15th. So I'm going to make a quick pause here if anyone has a question or clarification that I need to make.
Enrique, I'm going to jump in and just really underline what you just said. So just so everybody's clear here on what we're trying to convey, and we're going to send out an email to follow up, not just with you all that are here today, but just making sure the whole cohort's aware. Summit is on September 15th. The business plan what we're calling the business plan, the slide deck, is actually a requirement for CPRIT. It will not look good on you if we are not able to report on your project. So we absolutely require that you will get us that, regardless of whether or not you're actually going to be able to make Summit. As for Summit, that's the last opportunity for you to work with partners. And even if you're not having investor conversations, because it's going to be dependent on whether or not you're actually in a position to be having those conversations, it's a really great opportunity. We're trying to match you with really excellent partners. It takes a lot of time and effort on our side, and also takes a lot of time and effort from an engagement from our partners. And so you have to have signed up and at least started these office hour conversations. And these are not 1 hour office hour, just conversational conversations. We expect you to be showing up with some slides, and we're actually having working sessions with you to work on those by the 31st. They don't have to all be done by the 31st. If we get it all done, then that's great if we're ahead of time, but you have to have signed up for those. You have to have confirmed with us by the 31st of July, or else we cannot schedule you for those one-on-one sessions for Summit. You'll still be invited to the reception, but I'm just trying to make very, very crystal clear, because we need everybody to be able to present themselves to the best they can and respect our partners' time as well. So that's all I wanted to say, Enrique. I'm just trying to be really crystal clear, so we don't have any misunderstandings later on.
No, this is awesome. And keep in mind that this is what you all have been working towards, right? This, in the very end, what your aspiration is and what your desire is to get all these in place so that you can go out and gain traction and excitement for your project. So please keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about three key documents today that are going to be important for your new company. These documents are going to help you communicate what your aims are and what your plans ahead are. So, so far, the ACT program has made available to you. We have given you access to strategic advisors, to expert consultants in different domains of knowledge. We have provided also helpful business guidance. And all this has been in the spirit of helping you build a successful company for your technology and ultimately advance your program closer to the clinic, therefore closer to patients. Now, the outcome of your engagement during the program will be an integrated and realistic plan for your project, which will be important for you to articulate what it takes to make it happen, and how far do you need to go, and get those external entities or stakeholders informed of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, the tools that we're going to be discussing are these three documents. Very simple. The TPP, that's where it all starts, and we're going to go into details on that. It will be, the TPP describes what your goals are at the end of the program. And once you have your drug going through clinical development and commercialization, it's a tool that will facilitate the communication with other parties, such as regulatory agencies. The second document will be the business plan or pitch deck. This document is very helpful for communicating with VCs or partners or collaborators, right? It will be a summary, probably around 15 to 20 pages. It describes your technology, the stage of development, and some of the milestones and financial requirements, not only from the drug development perspective, but also from the company formation perspective. So very important document, and that's the one that you're going to be pitching during Summit on September 15th. And then we will go out and celebrate at the reception. So, and then lastly, is an executive summary. The goal of this document is to present just an overview at a glance, you know, a couple pages of information, so that anybody can grab those, quickly read about what you guys are doing, what the company is doing, what the technology is about, and who's your patient target profile. And the executive summary is pretty much a drawing information from your business plan in a more concise, simplified way. And we will look at some examples as we move ahead. Now, as we know, there's different audiences, and we should keep that in mind and be thoughtful when we're presenting the new company and the technology. These documents usually include business-related information. These do not include proprietary information. It's focused very much in describing the benefits to patients, and it's the first document that people engaged in conversations are going to look at, right? So how do we make this enticing for the audience so that they can come back to you and ask more and further inquire and actually ask you for deeper conversations and probably move through some diligence if possible as well, so that you can land on some funding. So a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. So before you go meet someone, think of who they are, what are their drivers or thesis, investment theses, and then temper your documentation and your story to those nuances. These documents, having the TPP ready, will be very helpful because it will help you to communicate in a clearer and more in a complete way what your story is and where is it that you're focusing, right? So in this way, you will be able to engage your audience in a more productive way. So those are the 3 documents, and we're going to start with the target product profile. The target product profile helps the team to focus on the end game, right? We have heard frequently that we should start with the end in mind, right? So the aim of the TPP is to focus on the innovation and make it a fit for purpose kind of analysis, driven towards meeting the specific clinical needs that we have and that we want to address through our technology. The TPP captures the proposed claims that will be appearing in the product label. So it is very important that you capture this at the beginning of your drug development program, because this TPP will help you guide the design, the execution of all your preclinical studies and your clinical trials. So this becomes a roadmap, right? And as a roadmap, it will be linking the different activities that need to happen during the drug development process, and it will be including all the concepts that will appear in that final label that the FDA is going to be approving for you. Now, keep in mind that the TPP is not static, it's dynamic, right? So the goal is to have an approved product label from FDA. And labeling will be the final step of the process. And that's when you will get your approval. So let's try writing this document first so that we can have a path ahead and guidance on how we need to conduct all our preclinical and clinical trials. When we write effective TPPs, there's few benefits that we will be achieving, right? Planning is always about finding the most efficient route and not to run into wasting time and resources, right? So the idea is that a well-thought TPP will help us in finding the most effective, the most efficient road ahead in the development timeline. Now, once you have that document, it also helps you drive collaboration across multiple partners and gain alignment on what it's needed to be accomplished throughout the DD plan. And it also gives you the opportunity to identify key issues that you might or might not have considered and take action to resolve these and include those the right thinking so that you don't run into any issues as you move forward. So the TPP can help you prepare for discussions with FDA as it captures the value proposition by clearly defining what the clinical differentiation is for your project. So keep in mind that it's all about the patient, clinical differentiation, right? And that's what your label is going to be all about. So what we have seen for the TPPs is that we aim to have a clear and concise summary of what we intend. It is also a document that is created by multiple views, and I mean that multiple functions should be looking at it to make sure that the TPP is aligned with the clinical outcomes that we're looking for. So it's a document that you will revise and revisit constantly as you involve other people with other knowledge of experiences that can contribute in having a better plan for the DD process. So another idea that I wanted to share with you is that at some point, as your company evolves, you will be engaging many different stakeholders. The couple type of internal collaborators that I think you should be thinking of involving as soon as you can to review the TPP are your KOLs, your key opinion leaders, and also your scientific and or medical advisors, so that you can ensure that you're capturing everything that you need in that summary TPP, so that you're not really putting out fires when the time comes, when you move ahead in the development. So as you gain more data and more insights, then you can go back to this document and keep refreshing, and the values and the information will be driven by real outcomes, right? Once you go clinical and once you engage other people, then you keep building it. So the TPP, there's an FDA guidance. The FDA guidance, it's such a guidance only, is a non-binding document, and it's organized in 16 sections. For our program here at ACT, we would like to focus on these 5 sections. As you notice, there's a link to the FDA guidance, which is also in the SharePoint that you all have access to. So the TPP is typically drafted during the early stages of the technology development, and it is a document that describes the necessary properties of the technology so that we can meet an unmet clinical need. And out of the 16 sections, we're gonna focus on indication, usage, dosage, administration, form and strengths, and clinical and non-clinical pharmacology. We have also provided you with a template for ACT, for TPP. This is the template here. It has some annotations in red, and this is in the share, in the Dropbox file, so you can download it and start populating it. We're going to explore each of the areas here today, and I also attached some links to the template, the ACT template, and couple examples of a small molecule and large molecule for oncology therapeutics for the commercial products Keytruda and Revlimid. So if you look at those labels, you will see where we're coming from. Your TPP will start looking like these instructions that you will find when you click these links. It will not look quite like those yet, because this is an iterative process, as we talked, and eventually you will reach the same level of detail and the same level of information as required as you can find out in the Keytruda and Revlimid labels. So we have broken down each of the sections according to these 5 sections here, and I'm gonna go and look at some of these ideas and concepts that you will have to observe when you're documenting your TPP. So the first thinking here is that you need to articulate the desired indication that you want to be included in the FDA label. Granted, it will change, right? As you find out more data and learn more and get more insights about how your molecule and your MOA are working together. So, but I would say that couple key factors to success are that you need to ensure that your desired indication and the trial protocol and the design of that trial protocol are linked together. You cannot start in a desired indication and end up in a, total different outcome from your trial protocol. You need to make sure that those are totally seamless and aligned. And then it's super important that you establish clarity and specificity in terms of what the clinical differentiation for your program is. Okay, and we're going to go into this in little more detail. So when we talk about the indications and usage, there's a few key questions here, which you see on the right. Basically, you're going to be asking yourself, okay, what's the indication and the patient population that I'm going to be helping here, and what would be the indication, and if my molecule or my technology has multiple indications, then you will need to flesh out each of the indications and marry those to the patient populations that these are going to be serving. So you will also need to specify what your therapeutic modality is, and then if the medicinal product is intended to be used alone or is in combination with other drugs, or prior or after certain procedures. So the indication is specific to a population, patient population, and also if you keep segmenting, it can also be specific to an age group. We can think of pediatric populations here. I think one of our programs is looking at pediatric specific orphan kind of cancers. So the more you specify and the more segmentation that you do, then you need to think that your molecule and your program and your TPP should be lined up with those specific attributes. You cannot, we do not suggest that you have a general TPP for everything. You will need to break it down by indication, by population, and so on. So this brings me to the dosage and administration, right? Again, once you have your indication, your patient segmentation, right? You will need to come up with what's the recommended dosage, what's the recommended therapeutic regime, right? And it will be determined by the treatment duration and the patient qualities and characteristics. So very frequently you will see as well that patient populations are not only segmented by gender or by age or by biomarkers, but also by weight and some other attributes, at times ethnicities, and all these segmentation is very important for you to keep in mind, because it will have an impact in the outcomes of your clinical trials. So there's also some considerations that you will need to think of if your drug should be administered with some considerations, or if post-dosage there are some other considerations that are needed to be considered. Let's think of diet, right? When people go through chemo, right, or fasting, or so those are some considerations prior to going into chemo. And those are the things that we need to have some clarity about. So I'm moving towards dosage forms and strengths, right? Very typically, dosage is strongly linked to formulation, right? So we can think of oral formulation, subcutaneous formulation, etc. And that could be, that is the modality that you're going to be defining for your product if it's an oral product, right? You also need to think that there may be several concentrations. At times, what I have seen is that the same product will have probably 3 or 4 different concentrations, and that will be administered to different patient populations because of mass index or because of age, and that's something that is commonly thought about, and how pharmaceutical companies think about this, right? Think of the COVID vaccine. We had different strength for kids, right? So it was the same vaccine. It was just a different volume and concentration. So you also will need to think about your primary containers. And what I mean by this is this going to come in a vial? Is it going to come in a pre-filled syringe? Is it a blister? Is it a bottle? How are you going to be presenting your containers, right? And then also think about if you're going to be in the need of having a device available or a kit coming along with the drug product, right? And when I say a kit, think about this in the following way. You can provide the vials, right? And then you can have a kit with 8 vials or 10 vials for the month, right? And that box will come in with some syringes, with some needles, with some alcohol swabs, and everything has to be labeled accordingly, and it all has to be put together in such a way that is compliant, and you will need to be defining what that final container and packaging looks like, right? So very frequently as well, some ministries of health require to have a specific presentation for their contracts. So if you have a vaccine that is going to go for a public Ministry of State, Ministry of Health channel, you will probably have to comply with specific packaging that is dictated by the Ministry of Health. Now, if you go in the private sector, then you have one commercial presentation that needs to comply with regulation, and that's it. And maybe it's multi-language and so on. Anyway, I'm talking about the most complex scenarios. You all will not have to go through that, but I want you to get an idea of how important this is and how complex it can get, right? So if you have only one modality and you have one formulation and you have one packaging, then there's no much more to do, right? Now, the last 2 slides are focusing on clinical pharmacology and non-clinical pharmacology. This is the section that we need to answer questions such as, what is the MOA? What are the toxic levels in humans? How is it metabolized? And so on, right? So we go into the space here of PK/PD results and toxicology, and then we start, listing all of these information here. Usually during the clinical trials, you will start recording and observing and documenting any of the toxicities that you might find. So that's going to be part of the protocol. You don't have to worry about it, but just be mindful that there's going to be expected side effects because of a drug class is usually known, and the FDA and scientists will know what that looks like. But then maybe you will find some others because of the way that you're administering your molecule. So you will have to think through it and start recording and documenting all these findings. But right now, most of you or all of you probably already anticipate what the potential toxicity effects will be. And this brings me to the non-clinical toxicology, which is some of the work that you have already been doing, and it will probably also include the GLP safety and PK/PD tests, right, and experiments. So you're going to go into documenting the results for your, and this is what you all do, the mutagenesis and reproduction studies, right? Carcinogenicity and any significant animal data that you might have already or will generate during the GLP testing. You will have all the data and you will need to record it for safety and effectiveness for the use of the drug in humans. So this is the TPP, and I'm going to make a pause here so that we can open for a little discussion.
Real quick, is everybody fundamentally understanding why we're going through this? It's not just to sort of say that we have, it's another form to fill out, but does anybody have questions as to why you would want this, or when it might not be relevant, or just why it's worth the time to do it?
So I guess I will start the discussion with the platform we have. It seems it's more complex than common small molecules or immunotherapeutics. I'm not sure how it can be applied to this kind of template, because it's a combination of different components when we speak about the toxicity or the dose or what we use, because there is the delivery platform, the targeting component, the drug itself, and then the application of ultrasound for the delivery. So how should we, I guess, work on this template? Should we look just at the small molecule we deliver and say that's the therapeutic, or should we have multiple templates for different components? Or
that's a perfect question, Jacques. Thank you. So the TPP, as it's sort of historically defined and the template available through FDA, is, you can tell, very, as you noted, very geared towards small molecules and that sort of traditional drug product. And it gets a little bit challenging if you're thinking about it in a literal sense, as you're moving towards maybe a complex biologic or even a living, therapeutic. That said, the fundamental goal of a lot of those sections is to sort of define, to the best of your ability, what do you think your product and your label is going to look like? What patients is it going to apply to? And there's sort of two reasons for that. One is, as a tool for FDA, CPRIT believes in this so strongly that they actually require it as part of their application, and will not consider your application complete if it's not a part of it. The other sort of reason to think about it is, it's very easy once you get down the path of these things to sort of say, well, I think it was good enough, right? And how good is good enough? And so sort of sitting down and thinking about that in the context of that competition, the context of the things that Enrique was saying, and kind of defining for yourself how good is going to be good enough on a per product basis, will help you keep an eye on whether or not your project's fundamentally working, or whether you need to sort of tweak it and change direction, or rethink your strategy a little bit, or go to a second product, right? If you sit down and you say, Jacques, for you with a platform, you're like, I have these three things, and you go through this exercise, it actually might be clarifying to help you see what at first seemed like equally good opportunities. And then as you go through this, maybe you realize that actually opportunity A, for any either scientific or strategic reasons, is better than opportunity B. And so that's part of why we use it as a tool.
Yeah, it's a planning tool. And can you see my screen?
yes.
This is the Keytruda Proc label. And you will see here that Keytruda has like 20 different indications for non-small melanoma, head and neck, gastric, cervical, renal, etc. And then you can see the dosage form here, which is an injection, right? And it's a 100 mg 4 ml single dose vial. It's not a pre-filled syringe, right? It also talks about dosage and administration. And the dosage and administration is described for each of the indications for Keytruda. Each of the indications have a different regime and a different duration and so on, right? And then this is the full prescribing information. I'm not going to go into there, but you can see all the indications there. 19. There's some dosage and administration, dosage forms and strengths, right? And then there's clinical pharmacology and non-clinical toxicology, which is what we have seen. So far we have seen item 1, item 2, item 3, item 12, and 13. So as you keep going in your program, you will be documenting the other sections until you get to a draft product label that you're going to be testing in the clinic, and then hopefully that will be your end product for whenever you submit your market authorization to the agency and or your IND, right? So Keytruda is a biologic, all right? It's an antibody, and this is how the product label, which the originator was a TPP. They must have had a TPP prior to getting to this product label, but in the end, the TPP evolved to this format here. And let me go back. Hold on. And I included as well a document for a small molecule. Let me see. Can you see my screen, my PowerPoint?
No, we can't see it, Enrique.
Oh, okay.
Also, I just want to keep an eye on the time. We're about 4:45.
Yeah, let me do this again then. Hold on. Can you see it now? Can you see it now?
We can see it. We can see it now.
So I also included a link here for a small molecule oncology product. So I'm gonna keep moving. Can I go to the
question here?
Yes.
Is there any like database or where we can search for such plan or useful resource? I know you shared template.
Yes, at the end of the slides, I included a resources page. And you will see a webcast, you will see the guidance.
Thank you.
See some examples and some ACT templates.
Super, thanks.
Perfect.
Yeah, the one I would add as well, just real quick, is drugs at FDA.
Yeah, but
drugs at FDA has everything under CDER, and then CBER. I can't remember the exact link, but they have a similar website. You can look up all the biologics labels and approvals as well. So just if you search them, anything that's been approved, you can go look at those labels and their wealth of information.
Thanks.
I think the FDA, the drugs at FDA site is been down the last couple of days. I don't know what's going on, but anyway. All right.
Can I ask a question just quickly? So here you're saying that list all indications. So at the current stage of our workshop or exercise, are we going to list everything that we can think of, or just those that we're going
for? I
Evidence.
think that you need to list the ones that you're targeting, and the one that you have the most opportunity to be successful with, right? And just focus on that one. All I'm saying is that for each indication, you will have a different patient population, probably a different formulation and a different strength, and you need to be mindful of that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna move into the business plan. The business plan you're probably very familiar with as well. So the business plan is nothing else but a communication tool so that you can articulate what your story is and how you're gonna be, and how is that you're gonna resolve a unmet medical need, right? It will also be a document that you can leverage to describe what is it that your aims are in terms of raising capital, in terms of drug development milestones, and how you're gonna go about the team formation. Again, this is also a living, dynamic document, and it will be changing constantly. So keep track of it and proofread as much as you can. There's 8 sections that are typically part of the business plan. I included a link here for the ACT template. There's a template there that you can use as a guideline as well. And these 7 sections include the problem definition, what the solution to the problem is, how does the competitive landscape looks like, who are you and what's your story, what are the achievements that you have accomplished so far, how does your drug development plan looks like, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and then what does it take to execute that drug development plan and hire that team and get the company going in terms of funds, and then you will need to articulate what your ask is. Okay. Hold on. Keep in mind that the document, the business plan document, is not meant to be exhaustive. It has to provide just enough information for for someone that is, sophisticated enough to understand what the technology is about, right? And then this will be kind of the first conversation that could potentially bring you to the next one to have a deeper conversation in terms of your plan and your technology and the needs that you need to make sure that you accomplish, right? So when you articulate your problem statement, make sure that you're emphasizing how is it that your product is, how differentiated your product profile is. Is it better safety, easier dosing, greater efficacy, right? Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to address the pain point. The pain point is no other than the unmet medical need, right? So you will need to articulate what's the particular condition that you're going to be addressing, and if you think about it, the very first competitor that you will have, that you already have in front of you, is the current standard of care. So make sure that you understand that as well, because that's pretty much your competition at this time, in addition to whoever is developing new approaches, which we're going to look at the competition section later. So please identify the patient population that you're going to be helping, and be very specific and succinct in terms of the niche that you're going to go after. The more laser focused that you are when you describe this, the best conversation you're going to have with the potential audience. When you describe the solution, the only way that you're going to be describing the solution is by presenting your data, right? Try not to overwhelm the reader or the attendees. Select the most important data only, the data that you believe demonstrates that your technology works. And if you think about it, try to use the most up-to-date data as you generate data through your experiments and through your trials, right? You will be gaining better and better insights. So whatever information you get from in silico testing will be very difficult when you go into in vivo And when you go from in vivo to multiple models in vivo, the data starts getting more interesting and more robust. So what I'm trying to say is don't go and present the in silico data when you already have a comparative data set for the standard of care, for example, right? Or when you have further advanced information. So focus on that chunk of data. Data will be your competitive advantage. We're in the business of demonstrating by data that our science works. And it will be very important that if it's a novel therapeutic approach that you're presenting, hey, you need to have the data that helps you articulate that claim. And also, well, again, reinforce how is it that your approach and your solution is different from the current therapeutic paradigms that is the current standard of care. We're going to the competitive landscape here now. I have seen, in my experience, I have seen that we all struggle with this, and let's. I'm going to try to just give a couple hints on how to do this in a more effective way for you all, right? First of all, be aware that there's always competition for your technology and your approach. There's no way there's no competition. Just the current standard of care is one. So that's the one that you need to understand very well from every angle, right? Who are they serving? How is it being used? What is the label, right? And if you understand that, then you will have a pretty good grasp of how the competition is out there, right? So if you think about Keytruda, for example, you will be able to find out that they are selling probably, I don't know, $15 billion globally. And you're going to see that they have 20 indications. And you're going to see that one of those indications potentially competes with your mechanism of action and your approach. So when you start reading their annual reports and you start digging into the information, reading the news and so on, you will be able potentially to identify how much of those 17 billion probably go into head and neck and head cancer treatment. It's not going to be a easy task. It could be pretty daunting, but that gives you a good place to start. So you will also need to look at if there's any other drugs being developed in the pipeline in clinicaltrials.gov, for example, which I didn't write the resource for clinical trials at the end of the presentation here. But if you go there and you start running some queries, you will be able to see if someone is developing new therapeutics for the malignancy or the disease that you're trying to target, right? So the narrower your market parameter, the easier will be for you to define the market and the competitive landscape. So how does your technology improve the current standard of care, right? Are there any clinical programs out there that are being developed? And then also, is there any deal making in the industry that can give you an indication of the market value? There's been many acquisitions recently, right? Last year, I think Sanofi acquired Translate Bio. Translate Bio is in the eRNA or mRNA space, right? So they were bought by, I think it was like $4 or $6 billion. And I don't think they had any commercial product out yet. So that gives you an indication of how interesting that marketplace would be, right? So I'm going to make a pause here because I know that you all might have comments and discussion points for this one.
Yeah, I have a question here. So when we talk about the market landscape, the size, do we have to give pretty accurate estimate, for example, okay, if I interested in ubiquination market, so can I say that, okay, so people have been developing similar things and the market for the whole cancer is $100 billion, but for ubiquination market, maybe that will be $20 billion. Do I have to be very specific about $25 billion, $24 billion?
You could be, but you will need to make some assumptions, right? For example, if you are going after cervical cancer and you're going to be competing with Keytruda, then very likely you will find out how many patients are out there, what stage of progression they're at, what type of medication they are getting or treatment they are getting. And if you find out that Keytruda is one of them for that specific patient population that you're looking at, right? Probably women 18 to 35, and you find out that you have 100 women in the States, and then you go to drugs.com and you find out that the reimbursement price for Keytruda is $1,000 per vial, then you can start connecting some of the dots and making some estimates and guesses on how that specific market for that indication, for that patient segmentation will be valued at. So
yeah, but as you said, we want to be narrow, right? We don't want to be say, okay, we
need to be narrow.
Very broad.
Need to be narrow.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have any database to say okay, just type in some specific keywords specific to a project and say, okay, in this area, the market size is this big, and anything like that?
There are databases that we don't have access to them. Let me just say there are industry sort of reporting databases that can do that. We can send out some links later. There's a couple different ones. I would expect a report like that. If you had something that was very specific to your product, that can be a $20,000 report. It's honestly not something you need for a preclinical stage for your first fundraise, which you're kind of trying to do. And because some of these are going to be developed as you work on your company in conjunction with your key opinion leaders. What you're really trying to do with the competition is your market big enough, right? Do you have a clear idea of what's actually already out there and what you're really standing? If you're going after to Enrique's point, if you're going after the exact same thing, you're like, we're going to beat Keytruda. We're like, well, what's even the recruitment look like for that? Because that's going to be the standard of care, right? Very quickly. It already is the standard of care in many places. You're not really trying to beat it. You're trying to understand, why do things fail Keytruda? And how is your specific mechanism going to catch those failures? And oh yeah, lots of other people are trying to catch those same relapsed patients. So who else is out there and how do you sort of differentiate from them? And you can kind of back into some of that through like the SEER database is really, I mean, it sounds very simplistic, but it's like a good gut check, for example, especially if you're going after specific indications, is like, go to the SEER database, look at your deaths per year. By definition, they failed all the therapeutics, right? Almost certainly, right? Yeah. And go spend some time with KOLs and physicians to understand, okay, what were those current standards of care and the lines of therapeutics, and try and make some best guesses. It doesn't need to be 100% accurate. You're just trying to get to sort of good enough. And if you get over like $1 billion for a market, that's usually good enough to at least start, especially if you can tell a story to a larger market in the long run. Does that help?
Yeah. I mean, I just found it difficult because I was trying to write a plan, and I know that who is doing this and who doing similar product or doing similar research or develop which company is doing that. But for this specific area, exactly like kinase inhibitors or targeting EGFR, how big is the market? I mean, let me to get those specific numbers.
So let me like give you an example, like a more illustrative example of like what I saw one of the groups from last year did, right? So they actually had a therapeutic strategy that could theoretically apply to multiple sort of oncology, or sorry, oncogene, there we go, oncogene driven indications. And but they felt like they had, for a number of reasons, but scientific reasons, a specific application in RAS-driven tumors. And they said, well, look, Amgen just spent a ton of money and just got a huge bunch of deals around Amgen's, RAS-driven tumors for this very specific mutation. And here's what they're not covering, right? So we know that this pathway is really critical in these tumors, and we already know that they're only applying to 5% of those tumors. And so we have a really nicely validated, it actually in this case, because there was a big fish, and even though that big fish had driven a lot of activity, it made a very nice story of like, look, there's this very validated path forward. And here's how everybody else is trying to pick up the 95% of patients, RAS mutant patients, that those that targeted therapeutics not addressing. And here's why we think that those strategies aren't going to work as well as our strategy. And that helped them tell a really nice story.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not trying, I think the mistake I see people make, and sorry, Jean, I do see you, and I want to make sure we get your question answered. I just want to make sure it's really clear here, because I see this, people make this mistake a lot. You're not trying to convince anybody that cancer is a really big market. We all know cancer is a really big market, and that fundamentally there's a huge need, and that if you can get a drug to that market and it treats patients better than other drugs, doctors will prescribe it and you will make money. That's not really what you're trying to convince people of, because even orphan indications make pharma companies a lot of money, as long as it's an orphan indication that they have a very unique solution to. And so that's really what you're trying to use this to describe. You're trying to describe what is your specific patient population in conjunction to how other people are, and are other people trying to address it? And if no, how is that, how's your definition better? And if they are, because they probably are, because lots of people are doing cancer, why is your solution better in comparison to that competition?
Right.
We're not trying to nail down exact numbers. We're trying to sort of get some smart guesses.
Yeah.
Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is regarding to the key competitors. So key competitors you talk about is, for example, along the similar pathway or same target, or it's in terms of another is, for example, for this pathway, this target, but there's no existing drug, but then you basically, the competitor will be some other companies still under the developmental stage, the companies, right? And so then the question is also related to if it's on that pathways against the cancer, if that company developed a certain type of cancer, we develop other type of the cancer, whether they were also considering as a key competitors.
I think if they're in the same pathway, they become your competitors if the indication is the same, right? Because you might have a different indication or targeting a different patient population, right?
Yeah, if it's a different cancer indication, well.
So you're actually asking two questions. I just want to make sure we understand the question.
Right.
So you're saying, how do you define your competitors?
Right.
And do you have to sort of highlight the competitors that are, so how do you define your competitors in the same indication? And then how do you define, should you include competitors that are maybe a similar pathway, but a different indication?
That's correct.
So for your first one, your competitors, the most direct one is, to Enrique's point, same pathway is obviously a competitor, but keep an eye on anything that's going to, if a physician has a patient, now we're not even talking about approval, let's talk about trial recruitment, right? And patients, I don't care what the FDA says, and I know that this, the forms that the patients sign for the trial say, oh yes, this is for research purposes only. That's not why they enroll. And the physicians have control over which trials that they recommend patients to. If you have a breast cancer patient in a very specific, niche, will a physician likely suggest a patient go take your drug versus another drug, right? So that's anything that could knock you out from that, or if something's going to get approved, that's going to undercut your niche, or take out a, hopefully, I mean, not good for you as a drug company, but potentially like treat those patients so they don't need your drug. Does that undermine you? And I think a really good example of that is hematological malignancies right now. Cell therapy, if you have a CD19 positive hematological malignancy, probably you shouldn't be developing a targeted therapeutic for that right now, because cell therapies have an 80% response rate, and they're moving up into like second line therapeutics, right? And people are, even the relapsed patients, people are figuring out how to address that. I just wouldn't develop a targeted therapeutic in a hematological malignancy, even if it's a brand new target that nobody's ever heard of, right? I just don't think you're going to have a very good time selling that unless you have a really good explanation for how that's going to compete in that space. The other question is, I'm doing indication A and they're doing indication B. You actually saw that also for the cell therapies, where some of them did pediatric ALL and some of them did adult relapse and recurrent, B-cell malignancies, right? And so you'll see the pharma companies do that. They will go after sort of different ones, and you can say, look, everybody's over here. We're going to carve out this niche and become the standard of care here. That will only get you so far, because if your competitor is like a really big gorilla, you should assume that they have these other indications in mind, that they will get there eventually, but that for whatever reason, they're not doing it right now. So I would use that to inform. And the other question may be like, why didn't they go after your indication first, right? So you need to have an answer for that. You need to have an answer for, and if it's just like time or prioritization, if it's Pfizer versus Merck, maybe that strategy works. If it's like teeny tiny brand new startup versus Merck, maybe you should assume Merck's going to move over to these other indications before you can get there. And so that's kind of a strategy sort of consideration there.
Okay, I see.
We're gonna move forward, guys. So at some point here as well, you need to tell your story. Who is that came to form the company? Who is who, right? Who has experience in which domain? So if you think about it, your company is the team. So bringing together the right team is a big challenge. And pretty much the team is what gives you your company credentials and credibility as well, right? So please be mindful that as the company moves ahead and the drug development moves ahead, there are different stages that the company will go through, right? And the team will look different at each of these stages. Early stage companies will have probably a long list of consultants, but later stage companies may already have a scientific advisory board in place. So that's the way that you're going to be evolving, and your company is going to be looking different, right? As you make that, as the company takes that journey, you will need to start thinking about how do you fill the gaps for your team, right? And you will be able to talk about the experience of your founding scientists. You will also be able to talk about your consultants and advisory board, right? So make sure that here in this section, you're talking about who you are. What is it that you're doing? Why are you here? How can they reach out to you? Who are the experts collaborating with your company, and why are they relevant? Maybe you have a Nobel Prize in your advisory board, so bring that forward, just put it there. Or maybe you have a very strong regulatory consultant based in San Francisco. Well, and you're an early stage company, bring that forward, put it out there. Just make sure that you talk to people before you put their names in your slide deck, right? Make sure that they understand why are they going to be listed in that document, to what capacity, and also maybe get an approval from them. An approval could be, hey, this is too early, let's just do it. Or maybe you need to sign some NDAs or CDAs or even get into some sort of contractual agreement. So, but this is where you need to tell, why did you choose that name, right? Why do you focus on this malignancy? Maybe you have a personal experience and that's driving you and inspiring you and so on. As you make progress through the business plan here, make sure that you're capturing also your achievements. Make sure that you're talking about what is your IP and why is that competitive? How does the drug development plan looks ahead? And what are the collaborations that you already have in place? And also some of the grants that you have accomplished. You do not need to share any proprietary information at this point, right? You need to consistently describe what your differentiators are. And if you're a little further developed, you can share an idea of your operational costs and so on. When you talk about your patents, try to provide enough information, right? Write a little bit about the specifics. What is the claim? What is the status in general? What are the filing dates and so on? Because that's when the clock starts ticking, and your audience will probably be interested in knowing how much runway is left for your patents. And this section is where you leverage your TPP. So all that work that you did first, you will need to include some of the information here in your slide, in your business deck, and these will probably typically look like a description of your program, right? Who's your patient population? What is the indication? How does efficacy and safety look like? This is probably a place where you can put together some information about your efficacy charts, right? Or your safety charts, or any experiments that are relevant, and you can start plugging in information so that you can say, hey, this is working, it's working good, right? And this is what we're going to be targeting. So you will probably need to identify some of the key milestones and start thinking about what your drug development plan looks like. And as you move ahead, you will realize that you will start moving from preclinical through IND to clinical, phase 1, phase 2, and then all those milestones will require different accomplishments. For example, you will need to have some GMP material for your GLP studies, right? So you will need to start thinking about manufacturing, right? And complying with the regulation and CGMPs. So all this will be intertwined together. It's going to be important for you to understand how much is too much information. So you will need to find the right balance. The one thing that I have seen that worked well in the past, some people from last cohort, last year did, is that they were able to articulate the roadmap, right? Plugging all the information from the TPP, describe what the drug development plan is, and then start plugging in some value at some trenches. And in that way, you can show your Gantt chart, your swim lanes, right? And then when I look at that page or that view, I will be able to say, okay, these guys are moving all the way through GLP, and that's going to cost this much. And then they're going to move into process and analytical development, and that will be this much, right? And then you start segmenting your plan and putting some values to each of those trenches. I thought that was useful, some of the slides that I've seen last year. And that brings me into the funding, right? Funding and the drug development plan would be helpful to have them lined up together, so that as I said, so that investors or the audience can get a visual on how the funds are going to be deployed and what is it going to be achieved with those funds. Now, be realistic in how you're going to be using on what is the funding needs that you have. You very likely will have to engage external parties such as CROs and CDMOs so that you can build a credible funding progression analysis, right? And then based on that, you will be able to convey what is it that you need, right? You will be able to say, hey, this is a good idea for you guys because, you know, our marketplace is this big, and then I'm going to be deploying these funds here. We're going to get this far. And if we get that far, we have seen companies being taken out by big pharma with a very interesting valuation. So then you start putting it all together, but then the investors need to, you know, correlate what you're telling them about the funding needs and what the value is. And having this visual in a trench way, right? And being specific on what the accomplishments will be, is just going to be a very powerful way of conveying what your milestones and investment needs are. So I'm going to pause here before I go to the executive summary. So I'm just going to pause a couple minutes because I want to be on time and leave some minutes at the end. So this is the business plan or business pitch. Sarah, anything you'd like to add, or anybody else?
I'm just going to highlight, guys, that under the Dropbox resource folder, there is a template, if you didn't catch that earlier, for you that kind of goes over some of the same concepts. Obviously, you don't have to use the same template stylistically, but it shows a sort of progression that you can use as you're going through the story. It's not the only way to do it. It's just a way to do it that I've seen work really well for this stage of company. All right, we got about 15 minutes left, so.
So I have a couple more slides and we're going to go fast with the executive summary, because the executive summary is pretty much just a quick read about the problem and the solution. It's pretty much a summary of the business plan, right? And it's a way that you can quickly communicate what the overall aims of the company are. And I just attach here a view of how that looks like. It's just a couple slides. You know, you go through the executive summary, a statement of the major problem and current standard of care, and then you talk about what the unmet clinical need is and what your novel approach to solving the problem is that you have, and what your technology looks like. And then we talk about the IP and licensing status, right? Some bullets about your regulatory path and therapeutic approach, some of the investment trenches, and the competitive landscape. So these are just highlights. Actually, maybe you can do it in one page, right? But that will be up to what you think will be appropriate to the audience that you want to reach, right? I did not put this in the share drive. Let me see if I can find my original file so that I can put in the Dropbox link for you guys, okay? But this is not included there. I need to look for it. So I'm moving towards the end now, and I'm just gonna look at the first slide again. Does anyone have any questions about the key dates? If there's any questions, please just reach out to Ahmed, Sarah, or myself.
I guess I have just one question for the summit. How long should the presentation be?
That is an excellent question. Thank you, Jacques. So the presentation, we're targeting, Ahmed, correct me if I'm wrong, current schedule is 30 minutes per session. I would target a 15 to 20 minute presentation just to introduce yourself and introduce the work that you're doing. And you know, your goal is to always get follow-ups on these conversations.
And I guess follow-up question to this, is it better for me to be the presenter, or now that the company has been formed and we have a business partner, is it better to have the CEO present it, or is it something we decide?
It's purely up to style. I've done it both ways. It's always good for a CEO to demonstrate that they understand the material, but a lot of times when the scientific founder is there in particular, it's really useful to have you go through the data portions at least. And so
So do you have
sometimes you'll see
tag
people
teams?
can't.
Can you tag team with like company presentation
course-
by
of
CEO?
course you
And then
can.
okay, cool.
Yeah, it's down to the style of sort of the CEO and yourself, and do you like presenting, and you know what works for you as a team. I've seen both work out really well. But yeah, typically at minimum, the CEO would present sort of at least the business sections or maybe the introductory parts, and then have you sort of go through the scientific part.
Sounds good. Thank you.
There should, even though it's only 15 to 20 minutes, there should be some scientific portions helping demonstrate your technology. You're not trying to prove it, you're just trying to demonstrate it. And so that's a really good, clear distinction.
So will we have like an email kind of summarizing the different points we need to touch on, like on the presenting the company, the history, the competition, scientific, like the rationale and whatever
Yeah.
preclinical data we have? Will you send something like this to everyone, or it will be very flexible?
What do you mean to everyone?
Like before the summit, will you send an email saying that that's what we expect to see in this presentation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The template should cover all the pertinent points, or your presentation should cover all the key points, right? So what I typically would do, and what I would bring to these, working meetings that we're going to have, is sort of the fuller version. You don't have to have it down to exactly 15 to 20 minutes, right? And then you can always cut down a little bit further for the actual summit presentations. Typical introductory non-con slide decks, anywhere from 20 to 30 slides on an early product.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was saying thank you. Sorry about this.
Any other questions?
Just would like to get some clarification here. When you're talking about business plan, are you actually talking about the pitch deck or at the document business plan?
Yeah. So no. So what we're talking about, what we're calling a business plan here for the purposes of this discussion, is really your slide deck. It should incorporate all the major elements of your business plan. I've literally never seen a startup write a 40-page business plan. Maybe unless you're doing a secret application, because they do have a pretty extensive business plan. I mean, Ahmed has. I've never done it myself, to be honest, except for certain applications, like for SBIR and for secret applications, you do end up having some of those elements. You should have all that information in various documents. You should be able to speak to it fully. But your slide deck's your living sort of business plan, and it changes all the time.
So the different TPP you saw, typically how many pages are there document?
TPP should be 1 or 2 pages.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're just filling in the template. It's not, you're not writing a label. You're filling in a template with the key materials.
Because we don't have a lot of information we don't have. It's just
and you're allowed to have TBD in there at key points.
And the template is the ACT template, which is a abbreviated type of TPP.
We'll just put down information we have, just leave,
so what we put in there, what you'll see when you go into that folder, if you go into the Dropbox and you go to under like drug development, or I think is the folder, we have the TPP template, and I think we also have the slide deck template. And what you'll see, or no, it's under resources or something like that. If what you'll see in that is a ideal versus like acceptable. And that's kind of what you're trying to delineate. What are you going for? what's your sort of minimum acceptable outcome? Ideally, we think that we'll get a 80% response rate in our specific target patient population, but acceptable compared to, you know, based on the standard of care and the emerging competition would probably be something like a 60% response rate or 50% response, whatever it is, right? And that will help you. And some people will extend that, not to, again, that TPP, not again, because you're using this as a tool to guide your own development. Even though the TPP is listing patient populations, you might extend that to what's your ideal response and what's your acceptable response in specific mouse models, for example. And you'll see people use that in similar format. Any other questions? For the slide decks, guys, don't overthink it. It's very similar to what you have. Think about it, you know, I think people overthink it too much and they try and put too much of the businessy stuff into it. And really, just like a scientific presentation, what you're trying to do is explain, what are you doing? What else is out there and why your solution is better? You're just trying to emphasize slightly different aspects of that story. So you're not trying to prove ad nauseum, this is scientifically correct, right? What you're really trying to prove more, I think, than you would highlight for an academic presentation is, here's what other people are doing and here's why we think there's still an opportunity and here's what our solution is. And so you can use that competition. I see the competition, the one part of the sort of flow of the deck that tends to change a lot is how are you explaining your competition? You can put it one of two places. You can put it at the beginning of your deck and you're highlighting your problem, right? And that's kind of that progression I was talking about earlier. Here's what Amgen's doing. They're targeting RAS mutant tumors. We know that RAS is a major oncogenic driver. They're addressing 5%. It's a multi-billion-dollar market and they put in gobs and gobs of money to do it. Here's what they're not addressing. Here's what other people are trying to do to address that same unaddressed population, but here's why we don't think it'll work and here's what our solution is. You can do it the other way. Here's you know what we're doing. Fundamentally, we think we're hitting RAS targeted tumors. Here's how we're doing that. Here's why we think it's really cool, why it's going to work really well. Here's some strategies other people are using to try and get at the same population. And why we think that now that you understand what I'm doing, why we think that, you know, you should be able to see that my solution is better, right? That's kind of the flow as you put it at the beginning or the end, depending on how you're trying to highlight that competition.
I have like 15 slides. That should be fine.
Yeah.
You're good.
Setting your milestones is going to be the major thing that you probably don't have in your current slide presentation. So if somebody gave you money tomorrow, what are you going to do over the next probably 12 to 18 months with it? And about how much do you need, right? And how is that going to add value, right? And so it should not just by default be, and then we're going to go to IND and we're going to go to clinical trials. That's not really what you're trying to do at this stage. What you're trying to do is maybe you're doing additional mouse studies. Maybe you're trying to hit, you know, some sort of manufacturing, you know, outcome. Maybe it's just pure team building. Here's, and not just, oh, we're going to go get a team, but specifically here's who we're looking to hire. And here's why I want to hire them right now versus later. Right. And so when you can, it's just that part's actually very similar to a grant, but you got to sort of think about it in this sort of business strategic context. Right? Even if you're having an investor meeting, you're like, well, I've decided not to form a company right now. We're not having an investor meeting, so it doesn't matter. I don't need those. We're still gonna hammer you to have some of those milestones defined, because if you're still going into Summit saying, I still think this is fundamentally worth developing, even if it's not an investor-ready presentation, you should have a trajectory for how do you want to continue to develop that. So you could have a drug product, you could have a company in the future, or license, or whatever.
Well, it would be a lot easier to work out a milestone if I know how much money is coming.
It's not like that. It's not like a grant. You're not working backwards from the amount of money. You're asking for the money, but then sort of general, you're not like, oh, the grant says it'll fund up to 500,000. So I'm going to start at 500,000 and go backwards. what you're doing is you're saying, I know that an average seed round is anywhere between 1 to 3-ish million. So it's sort of within that parameter, but 1 to 3 million is a huge difference, right? Within those parameters, what am I trying to really get done and what's it going to take? Like, what do I need to get done with finite reason? And 1 to 3 million sounds like a ton of money, but it's like not. Just you think.
In
Not in
terms of
biotech.
I'm sorry, I just have another question. For in terms of presentation, do you still also have the Q&A session or afterwards, or is it just a pure presentation?
So
That's why I'd really emphasize trying to target 15 to 20 minutes so you have time for discussion.
Okay, the discussion time will be how long? Is
probably
You
10.
get a half hour. So it's whatever
so
you
you
don't
have the
use in your
total half
presentation.
hour. Okay, I see.
Who will be there?
That's a good question. So we're going to bring in potential investor partners if you're ready for it yet. And I'm going to emphasize that, right? We're going to bring in
Blueprint is going to be there.
your Seaport's going to be there. That's actually, thank you, Ahmed. Sorry.
For product development, external advisory
Yeah.
committee is going to be there. Our external advisory, all your TTOs are going to be there. Previous
Yeah.
cohorts, a lot of the faculty and advisors.
Yeah.
Okay. It's already
These are all
making,
people that can be helpful to you. And do not underestimate that your TTO can be helpful to you. Leaving a favorable impression with them is very important, as it helps them if they have somebody coming in saying, what do you got cool going on at MD Anderson or UT Health, right? Or A&M. They're like, I just saw this really interesting technology that you need to be thinking about, right? So your TTOs are very, very critical in helping you find partners, or they can be if you've left a favorable impression.
You will be at the center of the stage at Summit.
Well, yeah. So
it's okay to say that the technology actually is still in the institution, right? We have a company, but really the technology is not being licensed yet. Licensed out.
you should be absolutely honest, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you should be really transparent. You know, people will understand, for example, if they're a seed stage investor, they're going to understand that a lot of this is still in flux, and these are sort of things that you're trying to address.
Right.
So yes, we formed a company so we can do X, Y, and Z. We've had conversations with the TTO. They're favorable to us licensing. Here's what we have to get done to make that happen, you know, and have that kind of forthright conversation. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a comment here. Remember that we will be, you all will need to be signing up to the for the EIR office hours in July and August, and Sarah and I will help, streamline a little bit more the slides and probably point out whatever is missing and trying to be helpful, right? The biggest challenge that I saw last year is that it's not easy to put together a budget. It's not easy. It takes time, and maybe it's a good idea for you all to start thinking about how to do it. Yeah.
So one quick question. We're all pitching to the same audience, or do we have, our tailor-made audience group?
It's not a big demo day. It's tailor-made. It's much more, it's like the advisory sessions that we did at the beginning, right? It's going to be more similar to that, but with a different cohort of advisors who are more helpful for the stage that you're at this point versus then, right?
All right. So we're on time, right?
We're 3 minutes.
Right at 10.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. And if there's any comments, questions, well, you know where to find the ACT people.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
See
thank
you
you.
soon.
Bye.